So, what I wanted to ask you was, you've had this incredible career and you've done so much. Has there been a moment where you've gone, this is it, I've hit the big time?
No, because so I've known Russell Peters now for probably 16 years or more, maybe 18. And so from performing together at the comedy festivals when I started out to him now performing in stadiums all over the world, I know the difference between where I am and where I would think someone can say they've arrived, right? But for me, I used to actually dream about doing the same thing, but I would think more in Africa. So my thing has always been, I want to fill up venues in, Kenya, Uganda, and Lesotho, and more than I'm interested in doing that in the US. But for money purposes, sure, the US and the UK would be amazing, and Canada. But I believe there's more than a billion people in Africa. There's probably more than 300 million middle class people in Africa. Some countries are even developing quicker and faster than we are. Ethiopia, Rwanda, which has a fantastic comedy scene. Basket Mouth, I've been to Nigeria a couple of times. Basket Mouth is doing like 5,000, 6,000 people a show in Nigeria. Stadiums in Port Harcourt. Salvador in Uganda. So for me, that's where I would say I've arrived. If I can have hundred thousands of tickets and people talking about me in Africa, more than the world is easy. I've done the festivals. I've toured and worked with Russell, Tom Segura, and Jimmy Carr, and all these people. That's easy. That's like I can go to LA and call Russell, and then if I ask, he'll put me on his lineup. So then it's like now I'm in a show where there's 6,000 people in a show. You're doing 2 shows in a weekend, and then next weekend you're doing like another 5,000 seats, and then in 2 weekends you've done like 20,000, 30,000 people. So I can't now go and say, yo, I think I've arrived, because I've seen that. Before I did the first Blacks Only show, so 2004, I was going to Montreal, because my first time in Montreal was in 2000 or 2001. And I went via New York, and I was visiting Gray, who's a friend of mine, comedian friend of mine.
Yeah, I know Gray. I met him in New York.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He performs at the Cellar a lot.
Yes.
So Gray Barnes and Dwayne Perkins were the first international comics I brought here for a show called Comedy Blackout 3-4 years before I started doing Comedy Blackout, Blacks Only. I did a show called The Comedy Blackout, right? So now Gray was touring with Dave Chappelle, and I went to Dave's show in Long Island. This is 2004. This was when Dave just did season 1 of the Chappelle show.
And oh my gosh.
So at 8 o'clock, Chappelle does 5,000 people in a show. At 11 o'clock, does another 5,000 people in another show. This is before I was doing Blacks Only. This was June, July 2004, and Blacks Only started October, right? The late Charlie Murphy, Eddie Murphy's brother, his first ever stand-up comedy performance, he popped into one of those shows and he performed. And I saw his first ever performance on that night.
Oh my God.
So for me, there's so many things. There's having the Chappelle show. Chappelle would have thought in 2004 he had arrived, but today he's the most talked about comedian in the world,
Yeah.
I would, Russell Peters became famous more in South Africa first than he did in most other parts of the world, right? And here he was doing Eulodium, the sort of Indian suburbs, and he was selling out theaters, maybe doing 3 weeks of like 600, 600 people a night, right? And we thought,
What?
oh my God, right? And he'd be like, no, I'm going home to Canada. I do Air Canada Center, 15,000 people a night, 2 shows. The streets are blocked. And to him, it was like, yeah, well, that's what I do
Yeah,
almost
this is what I do.
every
Yeah.
year at home. And now you follow him, he's doing stadiums in New Zealand, in India. When we do 1,000 people in Cape Town and Durban and 3,000 people in Joburg, Russell does like 5,000 people in one town in India and another, and does like 7 cities when he's on tour. Middle East,
Yeah.
literally performs where most comedians have actually never performed in the world, you know. So I've seen all that, and for me, that's always been my inspiration, because I've touched Russell not in his studio, but I know him. He exists to me.
Yeah.
He's not this person that he's not like a Bill Gates. When you sit there and you think you're a businessman, and you think you want to be a billionaire, and you read about Bill Gates, right? I've known Russell. I've lived in his house. I've toured with him. So I talk to him every now and then. So for me, he's a much better reality and a point of reference when
Yes.
it comes to how far do you think you can get in terms of being a comedian. That's why even now, after like 20, 21 years, for me, I haven't even started what I really want to do with stand-up comedy. I haven't started.
It's amazing. And what I mean, I know you spoke about performing and touring in Africa. What is that? What is that dream?
It's for me, the idea is make as many people as you can laugh. That's it. So they can be anywhere in the world. Myself and Kagiso have performed in Finland, bro, where we were the only black people the entire weekend at a comedy festival. We were the only 4 comedians speaking English out of like 30 comedians in a festival, and everybody was speaking Finnish. Performed in Belgium about 2 years ago, Montreal, Canada, and so it's nice. There's places that are nice to perform, but they're almost like standard. If you become a famous comedian, you're gonna tour the US, you're gonna tour the UK, you're gonna tour Canada, you're gonna tour Australia or New Zealand, right? It's like a cut and paste. If you're famous, you're guaranteed that, especially if you're signed to like Live Nation or whatever, because then the system is the same, right? For me, everything I've done, I've had to produce and put together. And, I'm the first person that brought Basket Mouth to South Africa. When he first started performing in South Africa, he brought me to Nigeria. Then I introduced him to Dumiso, who's been there so many times. Introduced him to Loiso Gola, who's been there. He met Griff, who's now also been to Nigeria. So for me, we have like unfinished business as African comics. I'd rather say to Russell, can you come on tour with us in Africa? That's more interesting and exciting to me.
And bringing them out here again.
Yeah. So, but to go into Botswana, Lesotho, Nigeria, Swaziland, or to go into the continent, to go into Africa, and
it's incredible.
The other stuff is easy. I did a whole lot of tours where I went to Port Alfred and I ended up in Tata with Siaseya, Colesberg. I was deliberately performing in places where people had never seen a comedian and had never seen me. Which I have documented, and I'm part of the footage I'm working on releasing and keeping myself busy during lockdown.